Maya stirred her tea absent-mindedly, staring at her phone, waiting for a message that never came. Rayhan was away again, this time on a week-long business trip. She had stopped counting how many nights she'd spent alone in their house. Lately, it felt like she lived with his absence more than his presence. When he did return, their conversations barely scratched the surface. Updates about bills, his work, her projects. There was no warmth, no laughter, and certainly no intimacy. She had once been the center of his world. Now she felt like an optional footnote. That afternoon, her phone rang. Zion's name flashed across the screen. She hadn't spoken to him in nearly a year. He was her sister's son, but they'd always shared an affectionate bond. "Kala, I'm in the city," he said, his voice warm and slightly nervous. "My university canceled the dorm lease unexpectedly. I don't want to burden anyone, but can I stay with you for a few days?" She didn't hesitate. "Of course, Beta. You don't need to ask." Rayhan's response was short when she told him. "He's family. Let him stay." When Zion arrived that evening, she barely recognized him. He wasn't the awkward teenager she remembered. He had grown into a confident, respectful young man with a quiet charm. He smiled as he hugged her, thanking her repeatedly for letting him stay. She waved it off, but deep down it felt nice to be needed. The first night passed simply. They talked over dinner. He asked about her work, listened genuinely. She felt seen, something she hadn't felt in years. He helped clear the dishes, insisted on carrying his own bags, and offered to help with anything she needed around the house. She dismissed it as manners, but his attentiveness lingered in her mind. By the third day, the rhythm of having Zion around began to feel natural. He made tea in the mornings, brought groceries without being asked, and even fixed the broken curtain rod in the guest room, something Rayhan had been promising to do for 6 months. At night, they'd sit on the veranda, sharing stories about childhood and his college struggles. He laughed easily, and his presence made the silence of the house less suffocating. One evening, after a long chat over dinner, Maya found herself smiling without force. Zion had just told a ridiculous story about a prank at university. She hadn't laughed like that in ages. As he excused himself to his room, she sat there, staring at the empty seat across from her. The seat Rayhan hadn't occupied for weeks. It was a quiet ache, that space, one she'd grown used to. But tonight it felt more obvious. Zion had filled the room with laughter that Rayhan hadn't brought in years. The following afternoon, she caught herself standing in front of the mirror, adjusting her hair. She paused, scolding herself internally. What was she doing? It was nothing, just vanity. But when Zion complimented her earrings during lunch, she flushed. She waved it off, but her heart betrayed her, racing in her chest with a rush she couldn't explain. That night, as she scrolled through old photos on her phone, she paused on one from years ago, a smiling selfie of her and Rayhan on their honeymoon. They looked like strangers now. She didn't remember the last time he touched her hand, let alone kissed her forehead. Marriage had become logistics, a system, not a bond. Rayhan texted that night. Flight delayed. Might extend to Monday. We'll call tomorrow.
No epaledi.
No missing her. Just cold updates. She placed the phone on the table, exhaling deeply. Zion walked in with 2 cups of tea. "You look tired," he said softly. She smiled, grateful. "You always notice," she said before she could stop herself. She stayed up longer than usual, her thoughts spiraling. It wasn't that she wanted anything inappropriate. Zion was young, innocent, and merely being kind. She was reading too much into it. Still, there was a warmth she hadn't felt in so long, and it frightened her how easily she'd started looking forward to his company. She told herself it was just the loneliness talking, that once Rayhan returned, everything would go back to normal. But even as she thought it, a quiet voice inside whispered, "What normal?" The days began folding into each other, each one drawing Maya closer to a feeling she couldn't define. Zion's presence in the house had started to shift something inside her. He didn't do anything dramatic, just notice things like when she was too quiet or when she forgot to eat lunch. Rayhan had stopped noticing long ago. That thought alone made her stomach tighten. Zion wasn't trying to charm her, but his quiet consistency, his attention to detail, his kindness, it filled a space she hadn't realized was empty. One afternoon, while cleaning, Maya found an old sketchbook she hadn't touched in years. Zion noticed her flipping through the dusty pages and asked about her drawings. She hadn't talked about her art in so long she almost brushed it off, but he insisted, genuinely curious. She ended up showing him everything. For the first time, someone looked at her work with admiration that wasn't forced or polite. He said, "You shouldn't hide this, Kala. This is part of you." It shouldn't have mattered so much, but it did. His words stayed with her long after he left the room. That evening, she cooked one of Rayhan's favorite dishes. Not for Rayhan, but because Zion had mentioned it once in passing. He noticed instantly. "You remembered," he smiled. She nodded, downplaying it, but the heat rising in her chest betrayed her calm exterior. As they ate, she realized she was watching him too closely, noticing his jaw when he laughed, how his eyes softened when he listened. She hated herself for noticing, but she couldn't stop. Later that night, Rayhan sent a one-line text. "Too busy, can't talk. Hope everything's okay." She stared at it for a full minute, then locked her phone without replying. The silence felt heavier than any argument. She walked outside for air and found Zion already there, sitting quietly. They stood side by side, neither saying much until he broke it with a low voice. "Do you ever feel invisible?" She turned toward him slowly. "Every day," she answered. It was the first time she said it out loud. He looked at her for a long moment, eyes full of something she wasn't ready to name. The next day, she tried to put space between them. She stayed in her room longer, avoided shared meals, kept things transactional. Zion noticed. He didn't push but left small notes, a post-it on her desk that read, "Don't forget lunch," and another near the kettle, "You're not invisible." She kept them hidden in her drawer, folding them like secrets she wasn't ready to throw away. Farah called that night. Maya didn't intend to share anything, but as they talked, her voice cracked. "I feel guilty for things I haven't even done yet." Farah was quiet, then firm. "Don't lie to yourself, Maya. It's not about Zion. It's about what you've lost with Rayhan. Just be honest about which part hurts more." The truth sank like a stone in her chest. She tried to clear her head, focused on chores, meaningless tasks. Zion stayed respectful, distant, careful with his words. But his eyes, always watching, always soft, kept pulling her back to feelings she didn't want to entertain. When he offered to take over the laundry or bring groceries, she found herself hesitating, not because of the help, but because of how easily she had grown used to him. The comfort was dangerous. One night, it rained. The power went out. She lit candles, hoping the moment would pass uneventfully. Zion entered the room quietly, placed a blanket over her shoulders. They sat in silence, listening to the rain. He whispered, "You deserve more than silence." The words landed too directly. She looked at him, searching for something, reason, distance, control. But her thoughts were already spiraling. She went to bed restless. She kept replaying his voice, his gestures, her own responses. It wasn't physical. Nothing had happened. But inside her, a dam had cracked. It wasn't Zion she was drawn to. It was the version of herself she became when she was around him. Alive. Not dismissed. Not forgotten. She feared where it was heading, but feared even more the emptiness she would return to if she pulled away. The following morning was quiet, unnaturally so. Maya moved through the house with a deliberate calm, but inside her, everything was unsettled. Zion hadn't said much since the night before, yet his silence spoke louder than any words. She avoided eye contact, hoping to will away the heaviness that now clung between them. But it didn't. By afternoon, the rain had returned, soft and steady, like a reminder that something was about to give way. She busied herself with small tasks, trying to reset her mind, but nothing held her focus. She caught herself watching the door when he walked by, listening for his footsteps, feeling something stir when their hands accidentally brushed. It wasn't fantasy anymore. It was tension, real, charged, waiting. She caught her reflection in the mirror, searching for shame. It was there, but it was drowned by something stronger. Hunger. Not for touch, but for connection. To feel like she mattered again. That night, the power cut out again. The house fell into a familiar hush. Maya lit a candle, sat near the window, and tried to read, but her eyes kept drifting. Zion entered the room quietly, holding 2 cups of tea.
He didn't speak.
He didn't need to. They sat side by side, the silence between them no longer awkward, but waiting. When his hand grazed hers on the table, neither moved. Her heart raced, her breath unsteady. She turned slightly, and he looked at her, not like a boy in awe, but a man who saw something no one else did. His voice was barely a whisper. "Tell me to stop." She didn't. The kiss was slow, hesitant, filled with uncertainty and longing. When it deepened, she didn't pull away. When his hand touched her cheek, she leaned into it. They both paused, breathing heavily. She whispered, "This is wrong," but her hands didn't move. The room felt suspended in time. All the noise, the guilt, the rules, the judgment, vanished. When it was over, she sat on the edge of her bed, numb. Zion dressed in silence, not looking at her. She watched him go, but didn't stop him. Her heart felt full and empty at the same time.
She didn't cry.
She didn't smile. She just sat there, staring at the wall, waiting for something inside her to make sense. The next morning, Zion avoided her eyes. They exchanged polite words, nothing more. Maya moved through the kitchen like a ghost. The house felt different. Not just because of what happened, but because of what it revealed. She wasn't angry. She wasn't ashamed. But she wasn't proud either. She felt exposed, like all the things she'd buried inside her had finally been seen, and now there was no putting them back. Rayhan called that afternoon. His voice was casual. He talked about a client dinner and asked if she'd water the plants. She answered like she always did, tone even, hiding everything. He didn't notice. He never did. When the call ended, she stood still, phone in hand, feeling the weight of everything that had changed. She looked at the counter and saw Zion's cup still there. That small trace of him made her chest tighten. He told her later that day he'd be leaving the next morning. She nodded, said she understood. No begging, no questions. They both knew it was the right decision. But as she folded his laundry that evening, her fingers trembled. Every shirt, every small gesture, was a memory now. A reminder of a version of herself she hadn't felt in years. That night, she sat in the bathroom, staring at her reflection. Her eyes looked tired but honest. She opened her journal and wrote one sentence. "I crossed a line because I forgot what it felt like to be held without condition." Then she closed the book and turned off the light. There was no justification in her heart.
No revenge, no plan.
Just a single, irreversible act born of loneliness, carried out in silence. Zion left before sunrise. Maya watched his cab pull away from behind the curtain without a word, her hand resting against the window glass. The house felt instantly hollow. No messages, no note. Just the distant sound of a car disappearing down the street and the echo of something that had already ended. She walked back into the kitchen where his teacup still sat untouched from the night before. She didn't move it. Not yet. Rayhan returned that evening. He looked tired but casual, placing his suitcase down, asking routine questions with forced enthusiasm. How was everything? Did Zion manage okay? She nodded, smiling faintly. He left this morning. Rayhan didn't notice the delay in her voice or the way she avoided his eyes. He moved through the house like he always did, predictable, comfortable, distant. But Maya wasn't the same. The space between them wasn't just emotional anymore. It was now filled with something unspoken, irreversible. She tried to settle back into the old rhythm, but everything around her had changed shape. She moved slower, responded less, observed more. Rayhan attempted small gestures, bringing her flowers, asking about dinner. She recognized the effort, but couldn't feel it. It was like watching someone mimic affection, not because they felt it, but because they knew they were supposed to. She responded politely, never cold, never angry. But a wall had formed that even she couldn't climb over. Days turned into weeks. The air between them remained calm, but loaded. One afternoon, while searching for a document, Rayhan found her journal. She walked in just as he placed it down, his expression unreadable. He didn't ask any questions. She didn't offer any explanations. That night, he slept on the far edge of the bed. No confrontation, no accusations, just silence. And that silence said more than any argument ever could. Farah came over a few days later. Maya looked more composed than before, but thinner, quieter. She poured tea, then finally said, "I did something I can't undo." Farah didn't flinch. She simply asked, "Did it make you feel loved?" Maya looked down, unsure how to answer. "It made me feel awake." Farah nodded slowly, then said nothing more. The conversation ended there, but the understanding hung in the air. Maya began going to therapy. Not because she wanted to fix her marriage, but because she needed to fix herself. She wasn't looking for absolution. She just needed to understand why the emptiness inside her had grown so loud that she had been willing to reach for anything to quiet it. Her therapist listened without judgment, and for the first time in years, Maya said things out loud that she'd only ever whispered to herself. Rayhan changed too. He stopped trying. The small efforts faded. The silence thickened. They became polite cohabitants, sharing a home, avoiding hard topics, functioning like colleagues. Divorce wasn't mentioned, but the absence of confrontation felt worse. It was a quiet agreement to live with damage. Neither was willing to name point. One afternoon, Maya visited a park alone. She watched families, couples, people laughing. She didn't feel envy, only distance. Happiness looked foreign now. She opened her journal and wrote, "Love is not always loud. Sometimes it disappears silently, without warning. And when it's gone, you realize how long you've been pretending." She didn't reach out to Zion. There were no messages, no calls. It wasn't love. It wasn't even romance. It was a collision of two broken silences. They had both needed something in that moment: connection, validation, escape. And once they had it, they returned to their separate realities, carrying the weight of what had happened. Maya no longer waited for Rayhan to come home. She no longer cooked his favorite meals or asked where he was going. She started painting again, slowly, privately. The colors on canvas became her language. Each brushstroke a confession, each line a wound. Months passed. One morning, Rayhan left for work without saying goodbye. She didn't notice until hours later. And when she did, there was no sadness, just acceptance. She cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, opened the curtains. The light came in as usual, but she stood a little straighter. She had crossed a line she could never uncross. But in doing so, she had also crossed out the version of herself that waited quietly in the background for something that was never coming. There was no closure, no redemption. Just the truth, quiet, bitter, and final.